Hey, everybody. It's me, Robert Phoenix, my good friends, the Crimis, and we're back for a new year and a new decade on the Friday FARcast. Hello, Krys and Steve.
Hey, Robert.
Hello, Robert. Happy
and
2020.
everyone.
Happy 20.
We're in the roaring 20s. I was watching, I was watching some Newsmax the other night on TV, which I normally don't like follow that channel, but it was on the TV that I was surfing through. And there's a show called The War Room, and it's with Steve Bannon and this other guy. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Wasn't that the name of the show that Owen Schroyer did?
Yes, it
or
is.
does with the War Room? So now Steve Bannon has his own version of it.
And I think Leo Zagami goes on there sometimes as well.
On the which one? On the
Owen Schroyer show.
Right. Yeah, sure he would not set foot on Steve Bannon's show.
Oh God, no.
Yeah.
That would be like, its own kerfuffle.
Could be matter and antimatter kind of thing.
Steve Bannon is interesting, but I don't think I trust him 100% of the time.
I know.
No, actually, sometimes I try to figure out, is there anybody that is trustworthy?
I really admire Steve Bannon's mind. He is brilliant.
Yeah, he's a Sagittarius. He sees the big picture.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he understands sort of these obscure international currents.
Yes.
Right, of things that flow back and forth. I don't think he's in the United States anymore. I think he's been, I could be completely wrong, but I think he's been in Europe for the last couple of years, which is a really good place for him. Like, he needs to be outside of things in order to see things.
Yeah.
There was a brief discussion that he was going to pop back into the Trump administration, but then I haven't heard that for a while.
Also, he was in the Navy, I believe, and in the China Sea on a ship. Mm-hmm. He seems to have, when he speaks of the Chinese people as a group, not the government, he seems to have great respect for the culture and the people. He always says that the people are very beautiful people, and the culture is, as we know, quite beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So he has some good insights from being in that region.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he's, at the very least, he's interesting to listen to. And he says things with so much authority in a lot of ways that he has that ability to convince you that he's correct or right.
One of the most enjoyable conversations I saw him in was with Candace Owen when they were down, I guess, by the border and building the wall. He's somehow involved with that project. Mm-hmm. And she is such a crackerjack. She's like snap, crackle, and pop. She's a smart one. And the two of them together were interesting. So I might have been one of the first times I actually listened to him. Mm-hmm. I thought, that's pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the interview that I saw with him was pre this attack on Iran that we're going to talk about today. And so they didn't have anything to share about that. But we do. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about what's happened in Iran in the last 24 hours, which I think is significant. And we were going to do a different show, and we're going to get into Astana and Kazakhstan and that whole part of the world. But this is a little bit more immediate, and we agreed last night that we're going to get into this. So we got some people showing up. We've got Donna Spicer. She's in the chat today. There's Chaos Engagement. There's Amy. Hi, Amy. Ms. Cheeky Monkey. And then there's Oswald and Snake Jones. Steve Bannon is Q. That would not be a far.
Cute? Q. I think he was going to say he was cute.
No. If you're into puffy alcoholics, I think he'd probably be near the top of your list.
Yes. He looks like he knocks a few back.
It wouldn't surprise me if he's Q. By the way, that would be an interesting call. There's Maury. Hey, Maury and Anna, and Louisa O'Brien and Chinook. Anyone look at Iran's chart with eclipses? Well, we're going to look at Iran's chart today. And we're going to look at Iran's chart from the perspective of the April 1st revolution. which took place in 1979. We'll look at it in synastry with Israel's chart, with the chart of the United States, and Donald Trump's chart with the United States as well. So we're going to cover all this stuff today and sort of the topical news. And well, we're also going to look back on Iran pre-Cultural Revolution. So this is sort of the images that led up to the revolution and some images of Iran, a very different world that existed pre-1979. So why don't we jump right in and let's bring you guys into the mix and kind of get a sense as to what you found out over the last 24 hours and what you've been able to piece together.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. No, the first feeling I got from this guy, remember Apocalypse Now with I don't remember the character played by Robert Duvall, who the famous line, "I love the smell of napalm in the morning," right?
Yep.
And he seemed like he was that kind of a character, whereas he walked around with impunity while the bullets were flying and the bombs were going off. And so the first thing that I thought was really odd about the whole thing is that this person just flies right into Baghdad airport, like he may or may not own the place, and so I thought that was really odd that was where they took him out, right outside the airport. He's not somebody hanging out in hiding in some camp or somewhere orchestrating,
Right, like
maneuvers by cell phone, but he's right in the middle of it. And that was, some people said that he had that, air of, untouchability about him. So that was the first kind of curious thing that I thought about this guy, Soleimani. And Soleimani is Solomon. I think most people probably know that, but that's the Arabic name for Solomon.
Solomon, Suleiman. So we have a derivation of Solomon.
Yeah,
right.
Which is basically of the sun, right?
That's Suleiman Suleiman the Magnificent.
And Suleiman the Magnificent was
the famous Turkish ruler. So that was like the first thing that occurred to me. And the second thing that I think might bear onto this was a report by a news reporter, and it was called Al Huran, which is supposedly a U.S. based Arabic paper. I don't know anything about it, but this person said people in the Iraqi government before Soleimani was taken out, were saying to him that they were afraid he was coming in to orchestrate a coup on the heels of on the attack of the U.S. embassy, and that he was looking to take out the president of Iran and lead a coup and arrest people. Now that kind of fits with things, though no one else is saying it. At least that was just the fear of the Iraqi government.
Some people are saying it. There are some news agencies reporting that, but they're going to be the tertiaries, not the primaries or even the secondaries.
So let's just sort of put this on the table and take it apart piece by piece. If you were, by the way, the character that you're referring to, his name is Kilgore.
Oh, geez.
In Apocalypse Now, Colonel Kilgore.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay, in the movie.
Yeah. So, but if indeed it was his intent to lead a coup, you'd almost have to have a Kilgore-like persona to have, balls of steel like that to do that, if that's what he was going to do. The question is, was he going to do that? Right? I mean, is that really what was taking place here? Or because if somebody either has to have that kind of chutzpah and just fly on a normal flight to a normal airport, or there's something else going on. And perhaps he was summoned to Iraq, and that's how he responded. Maybe it was not a military coup or clandestine mission at all. Maybe he was given some false information and was flying in a different capacity. I'm not sure. I'm just throwing that out there.
So is it like a setup? Well, you also have to remember too, and then again, who knows, but the people were writing on the U.S. Embassy walls, Soleimani is our leader. All
Right. So they're
Really-
leaving clues like
Right.
Kilgore was here, right?
Right, yeah, right,
Kilroy,
exactly.
yeah, Kilroy,
Right. So,
Killjoy.
so
Killjoy.
how much can you possibly trust that? But,
It's kind of like finding the copy of the Quran in the parked car
In a
at the
way.
at the Boston airport on September 11th,
Comparison
right?
could be
yeah,
made.
or the passport at the
Mhm.
bottom of the World Trade Center.
Right,
or
a little too obvious.
Right.
You know.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, it didn't have the ring of authenticity to it, but
Mhm.
somebody wrote it for a reason, right?
Yep.
But it's there.
Yep.
So,
And it also seems that this man had great influence in many countries. He wasn't just limited. So it seems like across the region, and that he was the head of this sort of a clandestine army. So he had great power in the region.
Mm-hmm.
And it really had the effect of cutting the head off the snake, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
It was,
Right.
You could look at it as a surgical tactic, just coming in and,
Right. But who? Yeah. Who's the surgeon though?
who is,
Yeah. Like who wants to cut off the head of the snake and why?
Mhm.
I mean, that's what I'm, always interested in. Like, why are we even there in the first place? I mean,
right. Well, that's
I think we can make some assumptions about why we're there, but how did we get there in the first place? We got there in the first place on a false premise.
On a lie.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
We
Yeah,
got there on a
You're
lie.
starting back. Yeah, you're starting back with 9/11.
Really.
Bush, Cheney,
We can
Rumsfeld,
never forget
Wolfowitz.
that.
That's right.
Everything begins with that. Everything
Never
begins
forget
with
that. Always remember that. Always remember who's responsible. We
And-
know who they are.
And and PNAC, and we've gone over the whole PNAC group. Another thing that I found that was interesting, the Israeli newspaper, what was it called?
Haaretz.
Haaretz. You have to say it like you're eating.
Challah bread.
Anyway, they apparently wanted to take him out in 2015,
Mm-hmm.
and the Obama administration, they claim, tipped Iran off that Israel was following him around to
And I
take him
think that I always like to just spell it out for people who don't know when we toss out
out.
PNAC.
Of course.
Let's just say what PNAC was the Project for a New American Century,
Mm-hmm. was
clobbered together in the late 90s by the neocons. That's going to be William Crystal and you name them all, and their plan, they had 7 nations that had to fall in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
And Iran is the last one
Mm-hmm.
on the list to complete
Right.
their project.
Mm-hmm.
So when we say PNAC, those are the letters for the Project for a New American Century that I believe was actually presented to Clinton at the time. I believe it was while Clinton was still in office,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
maybe towards the end of his
Yeah.
term.
Yeah. Because they would have had to have been doing that in the 90s.
That's right.
And that was through the American Enterprise Institute, the Brookings Institute, and another institute called JINSA, which is an agency or an institute related to Israel intelligence and military affairs. So those are the 3 main drivers of the Project for the New American Century. And the neocons, which you mentioned, Krys, which aren't always exclusively Jewish, by the way. John Bolton happens to be a neocon, so or a Zionist, and even Joe Biden has claimed that he's a Zionist. Joe Biden will claim he's anything, but that's what we're dealing with here. And so the subtext was Project for a New American Century : a clean break. And that was the phrase that comes after that.
And also, let's not forget that they said that what we need is a new Pearl Harbor-like event.
That's right. And that was the premise.
That was 9/11.
That was the premise of what happened, or was the key kind of the fulcrum of that plan, was to have a Pearl Harbor event, 9/11, and that they would use that event to do everything that they needed to do to create a global hegemony.
And all they want is for us to forget it. And let's not let that go down the memory hole.
Right. So now we're operating on 2 false premises. Number one, that Saddam Hussein was the guy who orchestrated 9/11, which is really what they were saying. Like they were making this big leap And then they had to make big leaps and lies about the weapons of mass destruction. And then the first false premise was that the players that they initially fingered as being the perpetrators of 9/11 really weren't the perpetrators of 9/11.
Right.
And most people who've looked into this with any kind of determination and clarity can figure that out fairly quickly.
Yeah.
So now we've got two false premises that theoretically are the reason and cause as to why our troops in this country, our presence is there in that part of the world.
Yeah.
And based on all of that, anything that comes out of it is, totally suspect.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So then, we're stuck, saying, well, we're stuck because we say, all right, well, now that we're stuck with this position, we're there, right? That's the thing. So what do you do? Because everybody's in an impossible situation. Trump, even though whether or not how much he wants to pull us out of Syria and Afghanistan and all these places, it also seems every time he tries to pull out, something escalates in order to make sure that we remain embedded there.
Right.
So that's one aspect of it. But yeah, so the question is, how do you pull out without something worse happening? Or how do you, and then in this case, how do you, all right, well, they've attacked our embassy because, we fired on one of their training camps because they killed a contractor. So we're getting into that whole Israel-Palestinian, tit for tat kind of game.
It's like a high school rumble, it's a big tangle.
So, I don't, so I have no answers on, how do we get out of there? I mean, if it was me, I would just say pull out and let the whole thing work itself out because, our people are dying there for absolutely zero reason except for loosh for, and armaments and the whole, the whole evil structure.
So here's where I think that I'm gonna be in their shoes for a moment, which is very hard to do because they don't fit well on me. But I'm gonna be in their shoes. So if we were now to evacuate the region, who do you think is going to come into the region?
Well, it's going to be, what's going to happen is what's actually happening now. And I think this is important to understand is this ancient Shia-Sunni rivalry. And those are really the two main Islamic factions going at it, Iran being Shia, the main force of the Shia side of things, and pretty much the rest of Islam. I mean, Islam is about 80%, I think, Sunni, as far as I know. And and if we pulled out, I mean, talking about a full pull out, pull out of Saudi Arabia too, and pull out of Israel. Now, what happens to Israel, I have no idea. They have the bomb, and they may or may not want to use it. Which is probably why Iran wants to get it.
And let's see how far back we want to go to understand the dynamic. So we were talking this morning, let's remember, Sunni, Shia goes all the way back to after Muhammad died. And there was a dispute over who was going to take the lead for this new religion. And so there was a family, Steve knows more about the what happened there. Was it brothers or?
Well, there was basically, if either went to the Sunnis followed Muhammad's son-in-law, and the Shias followed Ali, who was Muhammad's uncle, I think, and so they followed Ali, and then the story with Shiism is that there were 12 imams following that, and the 12th one disappeared underground and is going to come again, at the end of times to bring justice back into the world. But that's again, but the 12 around the one again, it's Arthurian. It goes back to Christ. It's in Islam and it's everywhere. That's certainly a mythical structure, and it's also, a geometric structure, and it's the celestial structure of everything, of the constellations, etc. So it's a real deeply embedded structure in our experience, in our
Mhm.
lived world. So the Shias went that way, and then mostly in Iran. And the other thing you have to remember about Iran, they're actually Indo-Europeans, right?
Right.
Their
Right.
their language is very closely related to ancient Sanskrit, ancient Indian languages, like Soma in Sanskrit is Homa in ancient Persian,
Hmm.
things like that. So so it's a different people. Um,
Yeah, they were Zoroastrians.
Yes,
That was they
yes,
weren't even
Zoroaster.
Muslims. They were conquered people
yeah,
and forced to take on Islam as their new religion, to
right.
abandon the
And
old one.
what few people know is that all our angelology comes from that.
That's right.
Hmm.
Comes out of the Persian culture.
Yeah.
Hmm.
The whole concept of angels and angels being sort of semi-divine, controlling different aspects of the world, things like that.
When I think of Iranian people as a culture, the image I get is like they're all kings and queens. They are very regal.
Hmm.
If you're ever in their presence, you feel like you're in the presence of royalty.
Hmm.
And when we were in Istanbul, we were over by the Blue Mosque and just in the plaza and just enjoying watching people go by. I said to Steve, look, they're Iranian.
Yeah, you can just
You
spot
can
them.
pick them out of a crowd.
Yeah.
They walk with this dignified, self-contained demeanor.
Hmm.
And it's apparent. It just oozes out of them.
Hmm.
They're very ancient culture and very high culture.
Right. Right. This is really good background knowledge to kind of get a handle on sort of the division between the two parts of the Arabic world. My question was more kind of contemporary in the sense that if we leave, who comes? And I think it's
Yeah.
China. I think it's China.
Well,
Oh boy.
okay, yeah. Well,
Really?
then that's the
Mm.
next part.
Yeah.
China coming through what we were going to talk
Mm.
about maybe a little bit with Kazakhstan,
Wow.
which looks to be sort of the center of this new world possibilities,
Religion.
Hmm.
and religion. But yeah, so the one road
One
comes
Belt, One
through.
Road. Yep.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that's coming through there. The pipelines and everything. Well, that's China. There's given credit. They got patience, and they wait till we basically exhaust ourselves,
Hmm.
just like we did basically with Russia. When they were competing with us for nuclear supremacy, we were able to kind of wait them out. They went broke.
Right.
You know, and
That's right.
they couldn't sustain it anymore. And China's just doing the same thing. They don't have to sustain 1,000 bases around the world right now. And maybe this is, I don't know, this is just like the way it's going to, I mean, I completely agree with you. I think that's the way it's going to go. And I remember when we did our show last year on our sort of predictive shows, the thing that we talked about was China, and
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
and, and China coming in and becoming this besides everything, I think it's replaced us as being the loosh factory of the world too.
And perhaps you can see that Trump is seeing a similar kind of dynamic, and he's wanting to pull all that back in and strengthen the country again, so that we're not constantly bleeding like death by a thousand cuts. So culturally, economically, on all levels. So
Yeah.
that's
I think Trump is serving two masters. No, I think
could
he's.
be.
I think he's.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think he's serving the people who have supported him and helped him gain office and even stay in office. And to me, that would be sort of the Goldman Sachs crew, the Chabad crew
Mhm.
through Jared and Ivanka, and ultimately that would extend into the Zionist world. And if you again we get into the Steve Bannon land and look at Breitbart, and Breitbart started in Tel Aviv. That's where it was founded, basically.
mm-hmm.
So this is like one faction that Trump has to listen to because they're his power base. The people that he goes to these rallies for, they're like his emotional power base.
Mm.
But his monetary and high psychic power base comes from that group. And if they basically say, hey, look, we want you to go in and disassemble Iran, or he's going to have to listen to them. I think the other side of Trump, and this is where we get into that schizophrenic Gemini, does want to do the right thing, right? He does want to, when he says, "I want peace," which he has said numerous times, you can hear it in his voice, and I don't doubt that. Now, how he gets there and how that's achieved is a whole nother story. So I think that we've seen this, Krys. You pointed this out. He'll do something which looks really good on the surface and begins to kind of appease this kind of war-weary culture that we're part of, and then something will happen within the next 72 hours, and we'll do something very, very different.
I know, and then you just like sigh, you know.
And I think it's because he's caught in this web, and he's going to do what he has to do in order to survive. So when we get into some of these charts, you're going to see this with his relationship with Israel. In fact, why don't I just bring it up? Is that okay?
Yeah, it's a good time. Yeah,
Sure.
Could I do that? Okay.
It's a good time.
Because when I saw this, it was like, wow, man, that's a trip. Okay, give me one sec.
It is amazing how the astrology just is so clear. And
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how people can poo-poo astrology.
I don't either.
It's just
Maybe
like,
only if they don't look at it. That's how.
so, I like to work with synastry charts because we can get a clear indication as to where these relationships between two entities are. So in the inner ring, we have Trump's chart. So we have that sun, the famous Sun-Uranus conjunction and the true node right there, making him the hyper Gemini. Look at where Israel's sun is. It is right on his freaking midheaven.
Right in his midheaven.
Look at that.
Right on his midheaven. Israel, by the way, has fixed star Algol conjunct.
What does that mean? Fixed
star Algol is the star of Medusa. It is the fixed star of decapitation.
Oh.
And
Oh my.
I've covered this quite a bit recently.
Huh.
And I got into fixed star Algol on Trump's midheaven as it relates to the French Revolution. Did a whole show on that one night. And then but here we have Israel's sun right on Trump's. Talk about influence. Are you kidding me?
Really? That's not going away.
This is very significant. No, it's not. It's in Taurus, which is fixed. It's a fixed sign. Let's go to the other side of the chart. What do we have here? Well, Trump has Mars in Leo on the ascendant, and guess what? So do our friends in the Middle East. So we have a Mars conjunction, Sun on the ascendant. Sorry, midheaven, and then we have the square, the Sun square to Mars. So this is conflict. So I would say that Trump is not always in alignment because of the square, right? He wants to be independent. With anybody that's got Mars on the ascendant, they want to do whatever they want to do, especially in Leo. Act like a king, live like a king. So the square to the sun isn't always that easy, right? Because the sun at the highest point in the chart is dictating what essentially the rest of the chart will do. And with squaring Mars, it's like, I'm not always going to want to do this. There's conflict with this square.
Well,
but there's also great potential for great force and violence as well.
Right. And the Plutos are together too. Wow.
The Plutos, yeah, because Trump was born in 1946. Israel, of course, started in 1948. Okay. So they're going to have similar Plutos right around the same time.
Outer planets, right.
But I think you're looking in the right part of the chart because Saturn is also here in Trump's 12th house. And Saturn is authority. So he's dealing with an authority that's behind the scenes.
Okay. So
excellent.
Yep.
And what about the moon with emotions?
So very, very dramatic moon in Leo in the 12th house. And generally speaking, it would be the 12th house tends to be a bit secretive and occulted. To me, this would almost be like Trump's second home. Right, because the moon represents the home. And in a lot of ways, it kind of is because didn't they name some stuff after him there? And
I think they did.
Yeah, and he's on one of the coins. Ironically, he shares the coin. I think it's the 2-cent shekel or something like that. He shares that coin with Cyrus the Great. Believe it or not.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Israel would have Cyrus on a coin.
Yeah.
That's an interesting coupling.
I think he's on one side. So to me, this would be almost like Moon in the 12th house, like his spiritual home, you know, because of the connotations of the 12th house. And then we have the Venus Mercury conjunction, which is very, very influential here, you know, which is being open, Trump being open to negotiation. Let's put it that way, which is what Venus would be noted for. But I would say by and large, this is a very, very powerful chart. And we know very clearly who's on top in this chart right there.
Right.
No
Well,
ambiguity.
and he always says he loves Israel, so I can see the Venus thing going in there, right? And the Mercury.
Yeah, and our great friends, right? Because the Venus is in the 11th house.
Well, you know, what were the first three countries he visited, right? Were Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the Vatican.
And that was weird with the globe.
Oh yeah.
I still scratching my head on that.
Like the first 6 months in the Trump administration.
What was that?
Such strange shit.
This is bizarre.
Yeah.
I think you'd be embarrassed to have your picture taken.
The one thing here that I find it interesting is this Venus square to Neptune, and that can be a little bit shaky. And even with the square to Jupiter, there's like a sense of overconfidence, and maybe at times, you know, feeling too big for one's britches in some ways. That would be the Venus Jupiter square. The Venus Neptune square would be agreements that could fall through, and that the relationship may not be as strong in some ways as both parties would like it to be. So that's the one thing in this chart that I see in terms of kind of the Achilles heel. The Jupiter opposition, I mean, I can see the Jupiter opposition being, again, kind of this countervailing force to Trump, right? So here's Trump and his sun is up here.
Right.
And then Jupiter coming from the Israeli side of things down here, and also being very close to his south node. And I think also this is where Trump is vulnerable, is in the south node.
His moon is there, and his moon is opposite his sun. I remember that.
Yeah, so he's born on an eclipse. He's born on a lunar eclipse.
Right.
And you can see, because Sagittarius deals with foreign countries and foreign entities, and really that's what's gotten Trump in trouble, or at least that's where, you know, sort of the friction has been. You know, whether it's Russia or Ukraine, you know, there's that south node down there in his fourth house conjunct the moon. So he tends to have issues with foreign governments. And even when he goes abroad, he at times appears to be almost like a bully or oafish, right? There's a sense of awkwardness, I think. He's much better locally, like, you know, the King of New York or Florida, or, you know, Washington, D.C., for that matter. But you get him out of his environment, you stick him overseas, and I think he comes off quite different in a lot of ways.
When you said King of New York, that kind of woke something up in me. Now, he was born in Jamaica, Queens, and he's been dethroned really in New York. He had to move his home base to Florida. So, you know, how do you think that affects the whole scenario?
Well, he's got a new home, and it's actually Washington, D.C. And his home, of course, he always had that while he was living in New York. He could always jet off to you know, wherever it is, Boca Raton or wherever his place is. But West Palm Beach.
Palm Beach, yeah.
Yeah, but I think D.C. is the location for his new throne, right?
Okay.
That's
a real throne. Okay.
Yeah, real. I mean, yeah, and
it's
so
real.
It is real.
It is real.
I got a question for you, Robert. So if he's born on an eclipse, and we're right between eclipses right now. Now, for someone born on an eclipse, is that like more of a power to you when you when the eclipse is happening? Why he would, you know, be, you know, whatever, have the force to do this particular deed that we're talking about?
Well, you know, it's a really good question. I mean, I was born right after an eclipse, like 30 hours after an eclipse. So my mother was in labor while an eclipse was happening. So I don't, we just went through an eclipse, and did I feel some great surge of power or something like that? I mean, no, not really. That wouldn't be the case, although I didn't feel bad either. I think eclipses are probably going to be more prominent when they're in the sign of the eclipse or the opposite sign of the eclipse. And it's a really good question, because this year, 2020, with the exception of the eclipse in July, we're moving, and the next one, which is on the 11th, by the way,
Right.
we're moving into the Sagittarian Gemini eclipse season. So in theory, it would impact Trump for sure. These upcoming eclipses would have an impact on him. So keep an eye on the eclipses, and maybe I'll do some of that on Sunday night, because I'm not really prepared to do it now. But we'll see. We'll definitely see. I mean, this will be kind of astrology in action, because if there's somebody who's very prominent, we're going to see where these eclipses are taking place. This is the guy that we're gonna see it happen with.
Okay. Yeah. Well, the Gemini Sagittarian eclipse, Krys and I probably don't talk to each other.
Yeah, because we're opposites.
That'll be interesting.
Right? It might be interesting to have a chart on Suleiman. His name.
Well, I've got him up here. He's March 11th, 1957, which, of course, makes him a Pisces. And why don't we bring Iran's chart up? Because this would be I don't have Suleiman's planets, although I can look at them.
If it's for Sunday, it might be
interesting. Interesting. Yeah, that would actually been a really good chart to do. Let me just do this. Hold on. Maybe I will do it. Let's see, what do we have here? Okay. Okay, that's the United States and Iran. Let me just find this. It's buried here somewhere. All right. So this is Iran's chart. Now we're using 12:01 a.m. as the beginning of the new regime, which is interesting too, because it takes place on April 1st. And we all know the connotation of April 1st. It's April Fool's Day, and there's a lot of really bizarre stuff that goes into this revolution, which we can get into. But so
just one quick question. So is the date the formation of the country? It's not the date of the hostages.
No, this is the date of the formation. This is the new Iran. Okay. The old one is done. This is the new Iran, and it happens 1 minute after midnight.
Okay.
On April 1st. So that gives Iran this ascendant, which is 7 degrees Sagittarius. Now, Antares, which started off when people started to track Antares as a star, it started off in the sign of Scorpio. And now, of all the fixed stars, by the way, the fixed stars are related to Persia. They're called the Persian royal stars. So, when now Antares is at 7 because it's drifted. Some of the stars drift more. Regulus was in Leo for a very, very long time, and it finally moved into 0 Virgo. So when Iran theoretically flipped their script, Antares is on the ascendant. And Antares tends to be like this sort of celestial cousin of Mars. It's very aggressive, and it's very formidable. So perhaps based on the chart, that with Antares on the ascendant, that the view of Iran would be that they would be formidable, or they would be dangerous, or they would have this kind of scorpionic, because that's where it started in Scorpio, the scorpionic kind of intensity, right? So that's baked into the chart. And that's been there from day one with this chart. Then we have Neptune in the first house, which is very, very different than Antares. Neptune, in the first house tends to be almost scapegoat-like. There's a lot of projection with Neptune. So Iran could be the big bad boogeyman of the middle. It could be anything, right?
Right. Well,
Anything but
does that go both
redemptive.
ways, Robert?
Well, I was going to say anything but redemptive at this point.
Yeah.
But
Does the projection go both ways? Sorry to interrupt.
we
In other
mean
words,
onto the rest of the world? Not really. No,
I mean, would
no,
they be
not
projecting as much as
yeah,
they're being projected upon?
not necessarily. Although I will say also that if we're talking about sort of this cleric-based government, which is really what happened once Khomeini stepped in, it was like the mullahs were going to take over, which makes them a lot more like Saudi Arabia in a lot of ways, to be quite frank, right? But that would also be very much like Neptune in the first house, that the country, the identity of the country would be led by these Neptunian figures, in a lot of ways, the priest class, that this would come into play here. So, so it's a very interesting chart from that perspective. Now we have Mars here, which has just gone into the sign of Sagittarius, like I think yesterday, and now within the next 2 weeks, transiting Mars is going to hit the ascendant of Iran.
Oh,
And to me, that would be indicative of some form of aggression, either coming, to me, that would be towards Mars, right? It would be, towards Iran. But, and the big kicker here is about 4 to 5 weeks from now, when transiting Mars gets up on its Neptune. That can be very, very tricky because there's a lot of deception. There's a lot of illusion. We live in a era where everything seems to be a false flag or a psychological operation. So they could be. Here's what I'm concerned with, and I want to know if you guys have thought about this. I'm concerned because there's a lot of chatter now about a domestic terror event here in the United States.
Right.
That's what I'm concerned about, and that they're going to pin this on Iran. And to me, this would be that Mars Neptune conjunction. What are your not about the Mars Neptune conjunction, but what do you think about the potential for a false flag terror event coming from Iran or being assigned to Iran?
Yeah, well, we've certainly we've been thinking about that. I mean, it's happened in small ways with the attack on the explosions at the airport in Saudi Arabia. It was happening with the tankers. It's happening on a small way for a long time, and maybe
but not here, right?
Yeah,
so
I understand. But, but and if you're looking to take the Trump administration down or down a negative pathway, one way or the other, I mean, that would be the way to do it, because it's all set up now. It's all set up in everyone's minds. Iran is the boogeyman. Iran is ready to do this, and they've explicitly said their retaliation, is going to be, whatever, brutal and horrific and all that sort of stuff. So the conditions are indeed ripe for that sort of thing. I have to acknowledge it's just that, it's a possibility, but and in a certain sense, it's always a possibility.
Right.
With these fuckers.
Right. And you can only hope that our own intelligence forces are on such high alert that they're able to avert something like that there may be a possibility there. However, the intelligence agencies can intercept it and prevent it.
Well, let's hope they're the white hats inside the intelligence agencies.
Well, this is the problem.
What happened with Putin, right?
Is it not? Because it ends up to be transnational, where there's no loyalty. It's just like, hey, if this happens, we'll make $1 gazillion, or we'll get more power, or who knows what motivates these people. So, yeah, there's that.
But but I thought it was also really interesting that Putin thanked Trump for intelligence that supposedly averted a domestic terrorist event in St. Petersburg and someplace else.
He called and thanked him.
In Russia. you know, for even just to have like an explicit thank you is unusual, you know.
What if Putin wanted to spend a week at your Airbnb? What would that be like? What if you got a call?
We need a horse. We need
That would
a
be
we
fascinating.
need a horse, I think, to
A
have
horse?
him ride around with shirtless.
A
But
horse.
other than that, you
I
know,
think
Stephen, Chris, I've been watching you on YouTube.
we
I
need
find you to be very charming people.
I'd like to
I would
stay to your
love to
Dasha.
spend a weekend.
your Dasha.
I stand
At
to
your-
your
at-
Dasha. Yes, da.
I've seen your lovely tea room. I would love to
Well,
have
that
some
would be
tea
the
there with
draw.
you.
The Russian tea room. Yeah.
I think the man is fascinating. I did watch. Was it Oliver Stone? What's this guy's name? Who did the
Yeah, Oliver
interviews with
Stone.
him?
Yeah, Oliver
I
Stone.
only got to see the first one because they took it down off YouTube. But we need to be able to have access to conversations with world leaders on that very one-to-one personal level, so that they're not always just this like little box on the screen and not they can just play. I want to hear the person's words. I want to see their body language.
It sounds like a reality show in the making. That's what I think we've got here.
You think?
Well, yeah. I
Yeah.
think,
Robert, you've got the platform. You need to invite
Yeah,
them
right.
live.
But no, you'd have to put them into unusual situations, I think. Right.
What isn't unusual these days?
Well, I'd like maybe Macron at a rodeo in Texas. I'd like to see that.
God, Macron.
Right. That would be interesting. That'd be unusual. Or Boris Johnson at a strip club or something like that.
no,
Don't
well,
even.
Well, I'm sure there's one somewhere in Asheville, but we're not privy to those
I
things.
don't know. I don't.
No, I
want
think
to know.
yeah, or just Angela Merkel like gardening.
Angela Merkel gardening. Oh my God, that would be.
You know,
She'd have to actually take her hands out of this position.
Yeah, and then she'd have to go put
Right,
a seat.
unless if they were just glued like this. And Chris, you could just put a pot in there.
Well, that's how
Right.
she would dig into the soil, Robert.
You just
You
give
see,
her a pot. Here you go.
It's-
Just yeah.
There's a reason for everything. But I really like the idea of a more human approach to world leaders. They are made into these stultified, static, iconic figures.
Maybe that's what they are, though. Maybe they're not real.
They've become that. Yes, yeah. And they probably see themselves that way. So I think we need to really get more into the human interaction. I really enjoyed that one segment that I was able to watch, because well, here's what I felt. What came across for me was that he actually really loves his people.
Mm.
That's what came across for me. And that's what comes across for me with Trump. Both of those men, when I look at them and they say that they love their people, it comes across to me that it's coming from their heart center, that they really do love their people. And whatever way that gets expressed, well, that's, what it is.
I think it's a really good point. I saw this one documentary again, but it might have been on Newsmax or something like that, and they had people talking about Trump, and both like in the Trump camp and not so in the Trump camp. And one of the things that they talked about is how Trump in New York was an outsider. He was not part of the blue blood establishment.
That's that kind of outsider. That's right.
Yeah, that kind of outsider. And so Trump theoretically, through his father, raises from the ranks of the people.
Right. That's right.
And so that's why I think Trump has an affinity for the quote unquote people, because that's where he came
I
from.
agree.
Well,
I really do.
And you hear that his sons, Eric and Donald Jr., who are in the business, actually learn to, whatever.
Oh,
you
right.
do whatever, backhoes or whatever. You use some of the equipment they had.
Right.
Actually, he made them have hands-on experience.
Right.
So they have, they have that in them where they just haven't been, gilded and removed from the actual business of what's going on. They know, physically and have an embodiment of what it is, and I don't really know them from a hole in the wall or follow them too much, but that's in the mix.
I think it's unfortunate that it's devolved to the point where you're not allowed to say anything positive, right? So you're slapped down immediately if you say anything positive.
Right.
Yeah, but he's this. Yeah, but he's
Right.
that.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
Anyway, we digress.
let people have their day. I also think that's one of the reasons why Trump has such an affinity with Jewish culture and Jewish power, because in a lot of ways, Jewish culture and Jewish power also assumes this outsider status, right, from the outside
Uh-huh.
looking in.
Uh-huh.
It's
Yeah.
It,
yeah.
and he is from the outside looking in, and he looks at this culture and says, "Well, look what they've done, right? Look at these people. I can align myself with these people because I'm really." He's got more in common, say, with Sheldon Adelson or, God forbid, Paul Singer in some ways, than he does with the Kennedys or he does with the
That's right.
Rockefellers.
Because he's not a blue blood.
He's not a blue blood. So, just
Yeah,
getting back to this chart really quickly, I think personally, I think Iran's a paper tiger. I don't think there's anything there.
I get that feeling, but I thought it was just a hope.
Well, because here's their Aries sun, right? They're an Aries sun, and that sun is trining the ascendant. So, there's always this kind of martial energy that's being, channeled through the identity of the chart. But then you look behind this Aries sun, and it's all Pisces. Venus in Pisces, Ceres in Pisces, South Node in Pisces. By the way, my true node is conjunct Iran's true node. That'd be a great place for me to live, actually.
It must be gorgeous.
I'd love to travel in Iran.
My sun would be right on the midheaven in Iran, or at least in this chart. Anyway, and then all this other Pisces, Mars and Pisces. Even Pisces is not an aggressive sign. Now, what's interesting about this Suleiman character is that he's a Pisces, and he's born March 11th, which is going to put his sun right here conjunct Iran's Mars. So clearly, there's going to be an astrological connection there. Now, whether or not he was actually doing something behind the scenes, which could also be the case here with some Piscean stuff, that's a whole other story. They got a grand trine in water. You see this? Grand water trine right there. Mars, Jupiter, Uranus, that's oil, that's water. I mean, just for me personally, let's make friends with these people. Make them allies. Don't make them.
That's one of the maddening things. But to your point about the paper tiger, think about it historically, right? What was it? It was 54 that the the last actual election, the last time they were their own country, was probably 1954, before one of us was born, and they. So what happened?
You can wear that brows proudly, though. Proudly, you look at her. Look how great she looks.
Well, everyone guesses that I'm the older of the two.
But an aside, Bonnie called us the other day, and I had just woken up, and I answered. I didn't know the number because it's coming from Ecuador, right? And it was like a FaceTime thing. I was like, and I saw my face on there, like, oh my God, that's so scary, and I couldn't hide. I was like, there was no place to go. Anyway.
All right. So anyway, just
so was that Mossadegh, Steve? Was that you were talking about?
Yeah. So that's when the Shah of Iran gets installed through the CIA coup. I think it was 54, and so that's a whole facade. Even though the Shah did some really good things, he did some really horrible things. And you were talking about some pictures, and that's probably about when the Shah was in there. So you modernize the country. When I was there, when I was on the border in Turkey in '83, the Turkish drivers would told me how much they loved when the Shah was there because the Shah kept the roads like glass, and they were able to drive really smoothly in there. And he wanted his goods coming in. All right. So after that, then you have another false, and then when at some point we can talk about this, I don't know, but the Shah seemed to want to make his own country. Khomeini, I've heard, and haven't done a lot of research on this, but he's another operative that comes in from France where he was living, and
there he is.
So you have this other false country, this other false thing, and nothing has been organic for the people. in Iran in several generations now.
Oh, it's all
Right.
imposed.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
Can we talk
the-
CIA? I mean,
well, absolutely. The Khomeini thing is really weird because nobody really knew about him. I mean, he was really kind of this lesser known character. He was not somebody who was very prominent on the world stage. He didn't even have a real huge following in Iran at the time. And yeah, he was in exile. And there's some very interesting pictures where he looks a lot like Sean Connery, by the way.
oh,
That's
interesting.
yeah, that's true. You can even see it there.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
the man who would be king, right?
The Man Who Would Be King. Great movie, by the way,
It
Yes.
was fabulous.
with Michael Caine. Fantastic
Worth a
movie.
revisit.
Yeah, that's
And all the Freemasonic symbolism in there too, right?
yeah, and that's the whole what that was like about the whole legacy of Alexander, right?
Yeah.
You know.
Yep. So here we have Khomeini arriving, and you can clearly see that there's this undercurrent of fundamentalists
Right.
that are living in Iran at the time.
Mhm.
And they were fundamentally opposed to what the Shah was doing. We'll get into that a little bit. So here's Khomeini, and primarily, look at this. You look in here, and it is primarily female.
It certainly is.
Right.
I mean, look. I mean, guys like a
And they're
rock
all
star.
wearing, and now at this point, and they're all wearing, not all, but I see some not, but wearing the veils.
At this point,
Oh, they're wearing the burqas because the Shah had outlawed the burqa.
Oh, we outlawed it. I didn't know we
Outlawed it. So what the Shah was doing, he was forcing, in some ways, westernized standards on Iran, which in some ways was not a bad thing. And in other ways, what you had was a whole contingency of very orthodox and fundamentalist people who did not like a state-sponsored government or a monarchy telling them what to do. However, this is a monarchy they can buy into, right? It's like trading in one strong man for another.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
This is just an interesting side thing on the clothing, because I mentioned both Alexander and Pythagoras adopted Persian clothing when they came back from there, and that both of them were Greek, and that that distanced them from some of the people, but they were so taken with the ancient Persian culture, even men, that they had just adopted it, which is really interesting.
So one of the people that watched this show, Genevieve, sent me a video of a theoretical giant that they found in Iran. And it's a bit of a sketchy video, but I got to tell you, the clothing on this mummified giant is spectacular. Whatever this thing is.
In what way? What did it look like?
Was it the bearded one?
Yeah.
I think we've seen that clothing.
Well, what it
it's like right out of Atlantis or something. Right?
It's right out of Atlantis.
Yeah.
Steve knows what I'm talking about.
But I don't. Can you describe it?
We've seen it, but yeah.
Well,
give me a minute. Maybe I can
okay.
root around and find it.
You mean?
Well, it's very esoteric and very elevated and very mystical looking.
Like shimmery kind of thing.
Wow.
It's very, very cool. So, if that's true and that was indeed the attire of Persia, I could see why they'd want to wear that stuff. It's pretty badass.
Yeah.
So let's do a few more of these pictures of the revolution, which I think are worth checking out. So you can see how much of a fervor was stirred up. This is another picture. Now this one is primarily men, right? You see primarily men here, where the other one is primarily women. And this is a religious force that had been summoned, right? It had been sort of brewing, and the pipe was about to burst. And they knew this, and I believe the CIA and probably the Mossad or whoever, more likely the CIA, could move in and then light the wicks on this stuff.
Yeah,
You
and I
feel
think,
like it's prepackaged.
and I think they had access to George Soros's print shop.
Well,
where all
that's
this
a
would come
really
out.
interesting thing that you're talking about, Steve.
Really?
Because no, really, because the next picture I'm going to show, the exact same thing came into my head. It's like who's making
Who's making all the placards?
who's making all this stuff? Give me a second.
Because
Because
prepackaged, right? It's like
Well,
it's
yeah, I don't know if you
so
remember, yeah, guys, I was just gonna say, I don't know if you remember before Trump picked Kavanaugh, there was like 6 different judges that he was considering, and they
right,
showed a room, and they had the signs already for each person,
right.
right?
Oh, that's
Remember that?
interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, they had like a room in one of these. Somebody, snuck a picture out of all these signs.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I looked at this picture, and I'm asking myself, how do they get this done?
right.
This is 1979, and they didn't have access to the same kinds of printers that we have now. So printing this stuff off in 1979, that is not easy, by the way.
Well,
No,
they had
it's
And
presses.
they,
They had presses.
Yeah, it's a large. That's a large format.
Mhm.
I couldn't do that for like $5 now.
you couldn't.
For $5 a pop, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So I had the exact same thoughts. Like who's behind all the, and you
Well,
see
who
this
else
too
is
with yeah. I mean,
You know exactly.
it's like here you go.
Well, unless when they took over the embassy, there was a good printer there. I don't know, but yeah, it's really amazing.
They would have ran out of ink pretty quickly, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But yeah, I had the same question in my head. It's like, who's doing the printing and all this stuff.
No.
So let's go back to pre. It's really interesting. Pre Shah, pre Ayatollah Iran,
So,
pre Ayatollah Iran. I found this. This is it's from Business Insider,
There
which
you
is
go.
whatever, right? February 11th, 2019. It's pretty new, about a year ago. So this gives you kind of a sense. So from 41 to 79, Iran was ruled by King Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah. On February 11th, the Islamic Revolution swept the country. These revolutions almost always happen in the month of Aquarius.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen it
41 to
over and over
70.
again.
That's a long time.
Yeah, that's when he took over from Mossadegh.
Wow.
So this is what,
Yeah, look
that's
how
what it
long
says.
ago. That's
I
a
thought it was
long
in the 50s.
run.
Okay, all right, I was wrong. I thought it was in the
51,
50s.
61, 71.
Yeah,
That's a long time. Look
So there
at
they are
you.
as a young couple. This is in 1942. That's his wife. She's beautiful. Look at her.
Isn't she beautiful?
Yeah.
right.
And-
And from what we know of her, she was really, really into education.
You're going to see it here.
especially and especially the Sufism.
Yep, you're going to see it here. So this is in 1946. This is what the main square in Tehran looks like.
Huh.
We got a little Tartarian architecture there.
I was going to say, that looks very Western.
Okay, however, even before the Islamic Revolution, the Shah's grip on power was unsteady. The White Palace of the Shah. So communists and religious members of society disliked the Shah and his pro-Western government. He's very capitalist and he's very modern.
Mm-hmm.
So here we go. This is 1946. So this is 53. The Shah had to flee Iran after Western-backed coup overthrew Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh failed. So Mossadegh is in power. And Mossadegh was very radical. He was the real deal. He was not into the West. He wasn't into the clerics either.
Right.
He wanted that oil, that petroleum, to be state sponsored, right? He wanted it to be an asset of the state.
So he's a socialist, basically.
He wanted to nationalize the oil industry.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see anything wrong with that.
I don't either.
It depends on where it goes. You got Chavez did it, and help people for about 10 minutes, and then that just turned into its opposite,
Right.
you know.
So 46, we've got more people showing up there. And then like Ataturk in Turkey. Do you know Ataturk? Do you know who this person is?
Oh, absolutely.
I know Ataturk really well.
Very well.
He's kind of like what
Nursultan.
Nursultan in
Nazarbayev.
Kazakhstan. He's like the father. What's amazing about Ataturk is that overnight, after the Ottoman Empire falls, he takes an army and kind of makes the modern borders of Turkey. And everyone, it was after the end of World War I, so nobody wanted to put up a fight. They were trying to grab as much land. But so he founded it, and then what he did was single-handedly, like in his first year, he outlawed the fez, which is like everything. It was like outlawing baseball caps here, right? People would flip, all right? And then he went from the Arabic script to the Roman script. And then everyone had to have a last name because people didn't have last names. It was always, Robert, son of Robert or whatever. And so
interesting.
So that's why everyone has names, like grape grower and things like that, once you translate them.
But he also shackled all of the Sufi tekkes, the schools.
Because the Sufis wanted,
and closed down the Sufi activity. Oh, they went underground. Right,
because they held up on Mount Ararat and wanted to restore the caliphate. So Ataturk has been the guiding force up until now. A secular Islamic country, basically Islamic, but with secular Western pointed direction.
The whole alphabet went Arabic.
And Erdogan is the one who's flipped it back, and it is what it is now. So Ataturk is like huge. I visited his mausoleum outside of Ankara, and it's just it's massive. It's a massive like Neo-Hittite structure with the bas-reliefs on the walls and all that sort of stuff. It's pretty spectacular.
How do you think Enos Cantner would feel if he made a really, really good play and you slapped him on the back and you said, Ataturk?
Ataturk, right. Well, of course, that's a whole other story. So he's a follower of Gulen.
Right.
And that's why he's not allowed back in the country. And poor guy, he can't even talk to his parents.
And that's a rough thing. So check this out now. It says these reforms, this is what the Shah's wife is doing, included the restructuring of Iran around a Central Persian identity. This is interesting, right? They want to take back Iran and take it back to Persia.
Right.
In the often brutal suppression of tribes and their laws in exchange for a strong central government and the expansion of women's rights. She sounds like she'd fit right in today, wouldn't she?
Right. And of course, the fact that Persia was tribal, and very nomadic.
Right.
And so it's this the same thing, and we're talking about the same thing in Kazakhstan. It's a very idealized version of history that they go back to and try to emulate. In other words, they create the history and then try to emulate it and build structures, in honor of a history that never really.
Well, there's something about the roots that that you can't cut off all the roots in some ways.
I agree. Why do you?
I mean, even if you can't cut it off, there's still going to be a couple of roots generally that are left, unless you go full Soviet Union, and maybe that's even then. Look, you're going back to the Russian heritage.
Right, and even then, they do reemerge, and like I said, in Kazakhstan has had to do the same thing because they were under the Soviet Union and before that Russia.
These photos are wonderful.
So this is they attempted to make religious observation subservient to the state, which is why there was this kind of fomenting of discord underneath the surface of things. Part of Iran's method of achieving was through the banning of veils in public. So they're like, okay, you're not gonna be a Muslim anymore. You're gonna be a Persian, a national identity.
Especially if the Muslim religion was imposed upon them.
That's exactly right.
Right. So it's not their native expression.
Women were also encouraged to attend school and receive an education. Very different.
Right.
Very, very.
As far as I know, that's also continued in contemporary Iran. I mean, women
That's
are
good.
doctors. It's not like Saudi Arabia. Women do get educated. They're doctors, engineers, scientists, etc. That sort of thing does go on in Iran. Though in the schools, the classes are fully separated.
I wonder how different it would have been if they had not put this hard line of you cannot wear your religious garments, if they had just opened it up and allowed women to make their own decision of would you like to go modern, would you not, and if it had just organically morphed into modern garb.
Maybe.
I wonder.
Maybe. I mean, I think ultimately what would happen is that there would be a power clash or a power struggle,
Mhm.
because I think ultimately the two styles of governing are diametrically opposed.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
You might, yeah, you might be right.
Yeah,
They're just
and
unless you have something like Saudi Arabia, in which the head of the government and the head of the religious faction, or this is what happened with Wahhabism. They like figured it out. Like, okay,
I don't see
we're
why
gonna
they
hit.
couldn't coexist. So when our first trip to Turkey was in 1985, and I had never been even out of the country, and I get plunked down in Istanbul. And what I took great joy in observing was two women walking down the sidewalk. One had full burqa, the other one had a business suit and an attache case, and they're just chatting away, blah, 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 great friends. And it seemed like there was a comfort in the two worlds side by side. And I think, at least for a time, Turkey had achieved this equilibrium where the two worlds could just, why not? You just coexist. But
Mhm.
you also have a point,
but
Robert. So I don't know an
but
answer,
yeah,
but that was my observation. It
they
was beautiful to see.
they could, as long as the generals in the army imposed it.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yep. So here we go. This is the two of them looking very Western and very cosmopolitan. Women and men mixed freely, and educational opportunities were greatly extended. Western clothing and norms also became ingrained into large segments. So these people are living the good life. Leading the charge for Westernization was the Iranian royal family. Pictured below is Empress Soraya,
Wow, another beauty.
looking very
Looks
beautiful
like Audrey
there.
Hepburn.
Absolutely. Under the royal family's invitations, Iran became a popular destination for celebrities and heads of state. Here, an Italian actress and her husband visit a sports competition as guests of Iranian Princess Ashraf,
Good old Gina Lola Brigida.
Gina Lollobrigida, and Milko Skovic. Very interesting. Yeah, it's the House of Strength. The House of Strength Stadium, 1963.
Yeah, I think wrestling. I think wrestling. They have a kind of wrestling throughout really Central Asia. That's very important. That's like a big sport for them.
Here's the alcoholic Churchill.
He's looking like he's looking that way.
He looks like he's looking down a Bodhi's at the moment.
Yeah, because I'm not a big fan of Western clothing. I would like to, in my imagination, wonder what would have morphed if Western clothing itself were not imposed, but some new thing came along.
The Ottoman court.
Western clothing is not very attractive.
Toward the end of the Shah's reign, the royal family attempted to rally the country around increasingly historic nationalism based on the preceding Persian empires. Very interesting. So they're going back. They're going back to pre-Muslim Iran. 67, Shah took the Persian title of Shahan Shah, or the King of Kings.
Wow.
And I guess she's the Queen of Queens. Has anybody ever done that for you two?
I was the Prince of Queens, but when I grew up.
Did we do something up on the farm one time? And
I guess it's better to be the Prince of Queens than the Queen of Princes. You guys should have like a coronation ceremony.
Okay.
I think so.
That'd be great.
Okay, you can preside.
Let's put that out over the into the Asheville community to royally coronate Queen Krys and King Steve.
Yeah,
Just what we
we'll be
need.
the king and queen of the Asheville Snowflakes. I think that'd be the.
There you
Just
go.
what we need.
All right, so now check this out. This is cool.
Oh, wow.
Celebrations
It's like
funded by the
yoga.
government. Yeah, we're also launched throughout the country to honor Persian roots of Iran. Here, Jimis take part in October 16, 1975 celebration. Yeah, it's like Korea,
Oh.
China, right? Very.
Yeah. Spider region.
They continue to value education and child development.
Right. And
Very
Very
very progressive model of governance, right?
But here's that bad Western architecture.
Tehran funded study abroad in Europe for Iranians, and schools and clinics were built throughout the Iranian countryside to care for poorer children as part of the Shah's White Revolution. Interesting. High oil prices, relative stability in the Middle East contributed to the growing business class. Major Iranians. This was a country on a roll.
Oh, for sure.
They were on a roll. Here, Iranians swim in an octagonal swimming pool at the guest house of the Iranian National Oil Company. Look at that.
Oil money can do great things.
And by 75, the Shah abolished Iran's multi-party system. He concentrated ever greater amounts of power in his hands under the government-permitted Rasta Kiz, or the Resurrection Party. Look at that. That's pretty cool, huh?
That's interesting.
I like that. Okay, by 76, he fled Iran during the Iranian Revolution.
79.
Fueled by outrage against the government, extravagance, corruption, brutality, and suppression of individual rights.
Well, that's unfortunate.
What does individual rights mean anyway? You know, and that to do what? The individual rights to what? Wear a burqa? Is that the individual right, or what? What's that mean?
Yeah, probably freedom of speech would be the most, pertinent one. That and you couldn't, obviously. I mean, the Secret Service of Iran, is that Savak?
Savak, yeah.
Savak, right? So they were brutal. People just disappeared all the time, and they were an arm of the CIA,
like
trained, and basically part of that. But anybody who had any sort of anti-Shah sentiment would just disappear, basically.
I've often thought about what it would be like to be somebody like the Shah, or one of these guys in South America who are trying to turn your country around and have a good country and good people. I mean, I think by default you'd almost have to become a dictator by default. You'd almost have to, because there'd always be these forces conspiring against you.
Yeah.
And what do? Do you play nice with these people? Do you say, oh, gee, we know that really, you're very put out of shape and you really want the bulk of the majority of the resources. And, normally I could just disappear you, but I'm going to let you hang out for a while because, my kindness and my compassion and my empathy is going to win you over. I mean, that shit just doesn't happen.
No.
So
how do you deal with treachery?
Right, and that's why
exactly
treachery. And I think that's
I think a lot of the time, and again, I'm not making a case for this, by the way, but a lot of the time when we view somebody as being brutal or dictatorial, that's just one side of the narrative, and that does happen. There are brutal dictators. That's true. But really what they're trying to do in many cases is put out a bunch of forest fires and keep some level of agitation at a minimum so they can kind of move things forward without
think of Duterte.
Sound familiar?
Maybe even in that
camp,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Duterte is one.
In the Philippines.
He is like that. That guy's a badass, by the way.
Oh yeah, no, yeah. I mean, he is. Yeah, I mean, he does what he has other people do. I mean, so I give him credit for at least. I don't think he's full of shit, and he is a badass. And I get a kick out of him sometimes. We have a someone from the Philippines lives right across the street from us. Really nice guy.
Yeah.
So we talk a little bit about
very
that
well educated, very knowledgeable about history of the Philippines and the Catholic Church in the Philippines, and have some good conversations there. I'm kind of curious to see what's going on in the chat. If anybody's got any interjections that they
let's see what's happening there. We got 115 people watching.
Hi, everybody.
Let's see. What do we have here? Mossad Association of Metaphysical Stores says Mossad plays both sides against each other. Classic OP. How do we know this is not a Mossad op to get America to attack Iran? I'd agree with that. We don't know.
Right.
Mighty Militia makes the man. I wish we could know what is really going on behind the scenes here. Let's see. Mr. Cruz, I think it's more like bridge than chess in lots of Trump things. The vice
Wait,
president has always been
More
Well,
like
what-
bridge than chess?
than chess, bridge, like the game bridge.
Really? Trump cards? I don't know.
I'm playing bridge. Is that what it was?
I don't get it.
Yeah, as Mr. Cruz says this. I think Chris Rock did a bit about this as well. Now the Mossad are in everybody's business, working with the country's agency. No, I'd agree with that. Peter the Great in Russia is another one who turned a nation on its ear culturally. That's from Maury. Are Chris and Steve familiar with Jason Reza Giorgiani? Question mark. That's from Oswald.
Is that Reza? So that must be maybe that's the son.
Oh,
of the
Genevieve's in the chat today. So it's great to have this brief history lesson. So saddening to revisit how much U.S. has contributed to the demise of so many of the Middle Eastern countries. Iran and Afghanistan were very modern. Definitely on the Iran side. I was friends. Yeah, I was friends with Suzanne Dahim for a while. We talked about
Right.
this.
Yeah. One amazing singer.
If you guys don't know who Suzanne Dahim is, check out her music with her partner Richard Horowitz. And I got to know Suzanne and Richard pretty well. We had a bit of a weird split, though. It got really weird because I had this idea about what's his name, the Roger kid from Santa Barbara, Elliot Roger, who theoretically was an incel and started killing a bunch of people. And I thought that it was a false flag. Well, they actually were friends with Peter Roger, who's Elliot's father. So we had a bit of a split there, and I haven't really spoken with them for a while. But for a while, we were very close, and I got to know Suzanne very well. And she was a child star in Iran, and went abroad and studied with what's that the Béjart school, right, of dance. French. I think Béjart is Belgian, I think maybe. Anyway, who paid for that? Iran paid for that. Iran paid for Suzanne to, go study abroad. And the Shah would have these festivals, Persepolis, festivals. And they were massive festivals with music and dance and theater. I mean, these amazing. And there was no charge for this, right? They paid for these like really mind-blowing cultural extravaganzas. And so she was a part of that as well. And she comes from that period of time. Of course, she had to leave, and because it was not a very safe place for her to practice her art. And her art is very daring. Yeah. One time she sent me these photos. She was working with this woman named Sharon Nassat, I believe. Sharon Nassat. She sent me these photos of these women in burqas who were like kind of burying their breasts. And they were like really heavy duty stuff, right? There was like this art installation they were working on. Anyway, she is somebody that comes out of that time and was a real beneficiary of culturally what was happening.
Well, it's interesting. The the whole. So first of all, that's the whole aspect of the culture, that we didn't touch on, and Islam is music, and Islam, of course, has always had this, ambivalent relationship with music because it can take you in both directions.
That's right.
And much of the traditional Persian music is just glorious and uplifting. But it's also really interesting that there's in Iran now, there's a huge music scene that I've discovered on Bandcamp, a huge electronic, ambient, and all sorts of really interesting musics are actually coming out of Tehran right now. Now, I don't know how, maybe it's because they can, do the music in small scales and just upload them onto Bandcamp and what have you. I don't know what kind of other scene there is there, but it's actually flourishing there.
It's good to know.
Well, I found the video that Genevieve sent me.
Uh-oh, some weird clicking sounds on your microphone.
Hold on. How about now? We good now?
Nope.
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 What's wrong?
It's just
When you speak, it goes brrr. It clicks like an
Really?
electronic click, click, click,
where's Jasper?
like static.
How about now?
Nope.
Nope.
Okay. I'm gonna have to abandon this. Hold on.
Okay.
One more time.
Almost
Now.
like you have a loose
Nope.
wire in your speaker or
Nope.
something.
Usually that's what happens when Jasper visits you.
Yeah, I know. How about now?
Yeah, good.
Good,
We're
good.
good.
Where is the boy?
All right. So I'll play this video, and there's no sound to it anyway, but it's interesting. So here we go. All right. Let me just turn this
Oh,
down.
good. Oh, good.
Okay, here we go. So this
Oh,
is
1,000.
what was sent. Giants found in hibernation in Iran. So I don't know what what the validity of this is, but it's clearly interesting.
Oh, I've seen that. Okay.
Yeah, this is what I was remembering seeing this a couple of years ago. So there's that sort of almost almost cuneiform like writing.
Yeah.
But the body looks very gray.
Like,
And are they gemstones in his eyes?
I'd be great too if I was laying there for 12,000 years.
I wonder if that's not a mask or something.
Well, because the beard looks like sculpted.
Yeah. That's pretty ornate. Check that out.
And that's fairly,
Yeah,
well, it's
looks
fairly Egyptian
Looks
looking.
very much so.
I have no idea who these guys are here.
Maybe they're the archaeologists.
Right. And then I've never really
Looks
seen
Egyptian.
anything else about this, you know.
It looks very Egyptian.
Yeah, well, if Egyptian followed on Atlantis, and again, I don't know how they come up with the 12,000 year old, but that, you know, that aligns with Göbekli Tepe and, you know, the end of the last ice age.
I'm digging that crown though.
You want one?
Yeah, I think, you know, I wouldn't mind wearing a crown once in a while, you know. I don't know about the pincers on the nose, but, you know.
It looks like a carving, like a statue.
You know.
Anyway, pretty
Yeah, fascinating.
esoteric, pretty sporty, esoteric.
Yeah, and I think at the time, maybe this came out of like some of back when we were watching like David Wilcock or something like that. I think he was showing this a few years ago as, you know, somebody in hibernation, actually, and not necessarily mummified. You know, I apologize. I don't have a, you know, I don't have a.
That sounds about right.
You know, or at least that's something that they would come up with. But
Yeah.
there's no, it's supposed to be a giant, but there's nobody there to give you perspective.
Right.
Yeah, that was the one thing that I was kind of having a bit of an issue with, but aesthetically, it's kind of interesting.
It is.
You know, yeah, or you know, it could have been an outtake from, you know, Metropolis too. You know,
Right, exactly. Well, rounding this thing off, I just feel like we have to be really on our toes with this Iran stuff, because I feel like we're in a place now where, you know, they've named the enemy. I was listening to talk radio over today, and, you know, conservative talk radio, and the guy on the air they were actually making a case for assassinating, which is what happened, if we can believe it, assassinating this general, Soleimani.
Oh, that's what I've seen.
They made a case for it, and they actually said that
assassination.
it's not stated, but theoretically, if you have to defend yourself, you can defend yourself, and that the UN kind of like thinks it's okay. Well, if you go into the Patriot Act, inside the Patriot Act, you can have preemptive strikes.
Yep. That's the Bush doctrine,
Yeah.
supposedly.
Because we
Not
say
like
so.
not like he came up with it, but you know.
So the talking points across conservative radio are that Iran is bad. They've been bad for a while. Trump has exhibited great restraint, and they deserve what they get. And moving forward, they're going to get more if they need to. So this is already being established. And I can tell you right now, it's just one station outside of Fredericksburg and San Antonio. I guarantee you that's a talking point being repeated across thousands of talk radio programs in this country.
Right.
That's the message people are getting.
Well, it is the new narrative.
We love to have an enemy.
I told you I was in college when the hostages were taken, and actually had a radio show that morning. I had to start at the station, and they have this. That back then they had like a ticker tape wire that would come out with the news on a single line, and so you'd go in and crank up the radio station, get it fired up, and then you'd go in to grab the ticker tape, look at what was going on, and they had a ding system. And one ding was something fairly important. 2 is, more important. 3 is like really important. This is a 3 ding. 4 ding is just like, it's over, cover your ass and get the hell out of there. But so this is a 3 ding. And so I put together the story and whatever, tried to figure out what was going on. But I remember, because we had a lot of Iranian, students in my school, not a lot, but a handful. And people were actually, I was listening to people actually say, let's go, round them up and beat them up.
No.
Like they had something to do with anything. So this is a, supposedly like a really smart friggin' school, Union College. It was like one of the top 10 schools in the country at the time. And, so this is what they want. This is want people to just get out of their fucking minds about shit. And this is how everything stupid happens. This is how every war happens.
That's why these conversations are so vital, because we look at it from all the different angles. We look at it from a human level and not from a manipulative level. We look at it as an inquiry. We want to understand, we want to understand who are the Iranian people, what is their history, what's the dynamic. Otherwise, it's all just, okay, you plugged into NPR and you're fed this line of bullshit and, that's what you run with. But this is very important for us to be able to look at these people as a beautiful culture. Yes, they could be a danger. We need to, or if you want to look at it as know your enemy, I don't want to look at it as know my enemy. They don't have to be my enemy, but we also want to be prudent and not be naive. So I think we get some measure of equanimity by having discussions.
I agree with you. I think it's wildly schizophrenic in that, at one point we don't like the Shah because the Shah wants too much oil. He wants to nationalize the oil again, just like Mossadegh did. He wants more of the cut. And he's creating, for all intents and purposes, kind of a blend of nationalism and sort of this proto-mythical nationalism based on ancient Persia. So now we go in, we don't like that, we overthrow that government, and we install the Shah and the mullahs, because we were involved in that, clearly. And now we don't like that. And now we're going to remove them, and we're going to go back to a more nationalized, democratized version of Iran. And it's just like this whiplash.
Whiplash, good.
And the people of Iran they're the ones that are experiencing the brunt of this.
Right.
We all are. We're being emotionally whiplashed.
Right.
I agree. And I guess the question gets back to your original point, Krys, which is, can these two cultures coexist side by side?
Right.
Can you have?
Because you look at every. Sorry.
No, just can you have a system that's based on a theocracy, and at the same time honor the tenets of a non-theocratic. Because if you're in a theocracy, like that's a very heavy deal, right?
It is.
Usually.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Usually, yeah.
Very
so,
restrictive.
Right. Well, that goes two directions. One, and that leads to our next month's show, the one world religion,
Mhm.
as the option, as the answer to this for some people.
Which is looming.
We're going to talk about Baha'i. We're going to talk about Baha'i.
Yeah,
okay,
good.
Okay.
You know, but and also you have to look at the back to the neocon agenda, because every country now, Libya, Syria, Iraq, Iran, are a complete and absolute mess. And you know,
Well, they
Iran-
didn't
Iran
flip
is the next-
Syria. They did not flip Syria, but they crippled Syria for sure.
Well, there's enough, but and it's also being, you know, divided up. Turkey's grabbed apart,
Right. That's true.
et cetera, and the Kurds have grabbed apart, et cetera, you know. But each of these countries that have been on the PNOC agenda have not been flipped to anything. They flipped into civil war. And we talk about Turkey is now looking to send troops into Libya to take one side of that conflict, which goes back to, you know, Hillary Clinton and Benghazi, and the last time that someone tried to take over an embassy, whereas Obama had everybody stand down, as opposed to Trump's at least sending troops in.
And there was even a ship offshore that was saying, we're ready to come in and help stop this conflict in Benghazi. And they were told to stand down.
According to the father of one of the people who was killed.
That's right. And I take his word.
Yeah, I watched Obama's press conference post Benghazi. It was not something to be proud of.
Sickening.
So yeah, I mean, you know, and the end game, you know, I don't feel like this is going to lead into a ground war of any kind. It doesn't. It just doesn't seem, you know, even practical on any sense for a ground war or for some sort of World War III escalation. But, you know, it always seems to be this back and forth, tit for tat. We'll get revenge on this, and that's just the only thing people, you know, Northern Ireland you know, function on that principle for generations.
Well, 400 years
You
in
know,
Northern Ireland with the
you did
Protestants
this,
and Catholics.
You did this. We have to do something about that, don't we? You know,
Yeah,
and
where
that
does
just
that
becomes
end?
a way of life.
Mm.
Comes a way of life. You know, so yeah. I mean, you know, I'm glad we're exploring this, but you know, like you said, you know, what does it take? You know, that's why Plato would have the philosopher king. You know, the benevolent tyrant. That was his only solution. You know, to you know, an enlightened ruler is the only solution.
Have we ever
According
had
to
that?
him. According to him. No.
So,
Yeah.
real quick, I just wanted to bring up a couple things here, which I was just noticing these two, like the Iran chart with Trump. Like I didn't do that one, but I just realized something, which is kind of interesting. And I just wanted to throw this out there real quick. So again, this is Trump's midheaven, and where we saw the Israeli sun right on the midheaven, here we have Iran's moon very close to the midheaven. And they're very different energies, the sun and the moon.
Right.
But yet they comprise this kind of like alchemical principle, right? The sun and the moon, the masculine and feminine, the night, the light and the dark.
Right.
So in a lot of ways, it's an alchemical operation happening on top of his chart. But the other thing with the moon is that the moon is like obsession and madness and lunacy.
Mm-hmm.
So in a lot of ways, this idea of Iran and the moon is what's driving Trump in some ways, and very fixed. And again, conjunct Algol, you know, like cutting off the head of the snake.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But he would be much better off if he made peace with these people. Look, their Pluto is conjunct his Jupiter. He's got Jupiter in Libra. So when he says, I want peace, I do believe he means that.
I do too.
So
can you imagine if anyone else were sitting in the White House right now?
well, the one thing I will say is that Obama had no there's no love lost between Obama and Netanyahu. They did not like each other.
Right.
Right.
They did not like each other at all. Now, Obama had a different, I think, relationship with Israel. Of course, he went to the Wailing Wall and put on the yarmulke and everything. But I think he was kind of a land anchor for Netanyahu. Now, Hillary, on the other hand, she'll just go any way the wind blows and where the money is.
Yeah.
So I think we'd be further down the path, according to you, Krys. I would agree with that.
Yeah, feels that way.
Mm-hmm.
I have no doubt in my mind at all.
So one other thing real quickly, the one thing that we have, this goes back to the propaganda stuff that I was talking about on public radio or talk radio. Let me see if I can find this.
Oh, on the conservative.
I went to, gosh darn it, where'd it go? Okay, so I went to my website, and one time I did a kind of a count and a look at how many times Saddam Hussein shows up on either Time or Newsweek or some publication prior to the quote unquote war in Iraq.
Oh.
And this is all prior, right? More than just a madman, the showdown, most dangerous man in the world, Iran's dark night, Iraq's dark night, Iraq in the march. Are we ready for war? Tyrant of the Gulf. So, I mean, this is all propaganda to get us primed for when we, went into Iraq, which we eventually did. If we did here, but, part 2 was under his kid.
Also another piece to this whole Iran thing, of course, is the war between Iraq and Iran.
That's right.
That happened, and because, I mean, huge devastation, I don't know, something like, I stick in my head, like a quarter of the men of each country died. And
who did we sponsor? We sponsored Iraq during that war.
We certainly did. Don Rumsfeld with his famous shaking hands with Saddam Hussein. So that's the other aspect that we didn't explore is this legacy of trauma to those people too, that ends up, which ends up being, grabbing onto something like a religious, a religious leader or something like that. It'll lend itself to that because of your trauma.
And they know that. Don't think they don't know that.
Oh yeah, I mean it's all
part of the plan.
It's all set up.
Well, let's take a quick scan of the chat room before we sign off today. Let's see.
We love the chat room.
Yeah, I'd really like to go to the chat. Yeah, to see what people are saying.
Let's see. Can't find your website. No.
Yours?
I guess so. I'm going to be redoing my website.
Us too.
Yes, we're almost ready.
Yeah, how did your GoFundMe? What was it? GoFundMe?
It's still open until February 3rd. But we did get enough, and thanks. There were several people in the chat room, and so several people speaking here right now, who donated, and we're really thankful. And it was enough to get us a new website, which is probably going to go up this week, and then I'm probably going to do like a blog newsletter or something like that to let people know. And so that's going to go up probably sometime next week. But it's just about done, and I'm really pleased. It's nice and clean, and
but the campaign is not finished.
The campaign's going on to February 3rd, so that's in Indiegogo, and just look up Logo Sophia on that if you'd like to help out.
Because
we really appreciate it.
We certainly need new equipment and computer and what have you. The goal is $8,000, so we haven't come anywhere near the goal.
Well, we'll put the link back up.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
So you guys can finish off your business.
But really thankful. You're really thankful to people. People are really generous.
What a difference it makes!
It cracks your heart open.
Even,
it really does.
Even a percentage of the goal, it's like makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
So we got that. We got some books on the way.
Yeah, we got some nice new books coming.
A new beautiful fiction book, and then a book on esoteric Christianity by Peter Lambert Wilson, hopefully.
Yeah, if anybody knows PLW, he's interesting. Hakim Bey.
Mm-hmm. Right. All right. Well, why don't we get on out of here? We'll say goodbye to the habitats of Chatlandia.
Yeah,
And,
thanks everybody for hanging out. And I think next time we're gonna, the architecture and the whole thing in Kazakhstan, in Astana, is really interesting. So I think it's gonna make for a good show.
Yeah, sounds great. Well, listen, happy New Year to you too.
Happy New Year, everyone.
You too,
Happy
Tom, again.
2020. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be the best year ever. It's gonna be the best, the perfect year. It's gonna be perfect.
I think it's King Steve's year.
I think, well, Stephen means crown.
Crown. There you go.
We'll call him Rex Stefan.
Stephanotis was the crown of flowers that if you won an Olympic or a poetry something in Greece contest, you would get a crown of Stephanotis flowers.
Very fragrant.
So that's how it came to a crown or royal. So there you go.
Thank you,
Robert.
I just need a country.
Well, yeah. I think you've got
We'll
one.
work on that.
You've got one in that B&B, you know?
What's
That's
that?
it. That's it. I'm the
Your
lord.
B&B is its own country.
Yeah, I'm the lord of
It
my
is its own little
B&B.
place. It's completely empty right now.
Yeah, I'm the lord that has to do his own laundry. But other than that, it's okay.
Keeps you humble.
That's it. All right, Robert. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We
Thanks,
thoroughly
guys. We'll see you in a
enjoyed it.
month.
It's
Okay.
wonderful. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Thank you, Chatlandia. You've been watching the first Friday FARcast of the new decade. It was a really good one. If you like this show, go ahead and hit the thumbs up, subscribe, tell your friends about it. And my goal is to grow this so that we can have a kind of larger series of ripples in 2020.
Yeah.
So to that end, wishing you all, each and every one of you, a great year to come. And we'll see you on Sunday night with the first show, I guess, of 2020 for Sunday Night Astro Live. Krimis, we'll see you later. Everybody else,
All right.
bye for now.
All right,
Ta-ta.
bye-bye.